Differences between glycolysis and pentose phosphate pathway. So, first difference is oxidation occurs using NAD plus as an hydrogen acceptor, whereas in pentose phosphate pathway, oxidation occurs utilizing NADP as hydrogen acceptor. So, we can see in glycolysis, NAD plus is the hydrogen acceptor, whereas in pentose phosphate pathway, NADP plus is the hydrogen acceptor. Next is aerobic as well as anaerobic process in glycolysis. So glycolysis is basically aerobic as well as anaerobic, whereas pentose phosphate pathway works as only anaerobic process. Third difference is CO2 is not produced at all, and here CO2 is characteristic product. So in pentose phosphate pathway we can see CO2 is produced. If we see in glycolysis, there is no CO2 produced. Here this process, third step, is called decarboxylation due to the removal of CO2. Now next is ATP is generated where it is a major function, and the pentose phosphate pathway ATP is not generated. So we know that in glycolysis 7 ATPs are produced, whereas in a pentose phosphate pathway there is no ATP generation. Now ribose phosphate are not generated, and in pentose phosphate pathway ribose phosphates are generated. So pentose phosphate pathway, here ribose 5 phosphate is generated. Last difference is 80 to 90% of glucose oxidized by the glycolysis, and in pentose phosphate pathway 10 to 20% glucose oxidized by the pentose phosphate pathway. So there is huge difference here. 80 to 90% is oxidized by glycolysis in our body, whereas 10 to 20% of glucose is oxidized by pentose phosphate pathway.